In our last video, we dove into the very start of Project MKUltra, taking a look at the origins of the CIA's foray into mind control. We talked about how they turned to hypnotism in order to try and make people more susceptible to suggestion, and generally alter their states of consciousness. But today, we're going to dive even deeper. We're going to be covering Part 2, the chemical experiments. Get ready to turn your mind into a laboratory. This is Project MKUltra Part 2. MKUltra was a top-secret project, and its files were largely destroyed in the early 70s. What hasn't been destroyed, though, has revealed an insidious program of experiments that would put some of the most vulnerable members of society to the ultimate test. As the CIA got deeper into Project MKUltra, they began to move away from hypnosis and towards chemicals, specifically drugs. And there was one drug in particular that really captured their attention. LSD, or lysergic acid diethylamide, is a powerful hallucinogenic drug derived from the ergot fungus. When it hit the market in the mid-40s, it was being marketed as a potential treatment for mental health issues like depression, but its trippy side effects quickly made it popular as a recreational drug. By the 1960s, it had become something of a cultural icon. But while most people were using LSD to dance around a hippie commune, the CIA saw something different: potential. In fact, by 1953, they would begin experimenting with LSD as a truth serum, believing that it could force suspects to divulge sensitive information, which you might think would be useful during the Cold War. By 1957, the CIA had become obsessed with LSD and its potential application. In fact, they would base their research out of a Swiss laboratory in an effort to stay as close to the source as possible. They also set up shop at a private ranch in Mexico where unsuspecting guests would be given LSD and their reactions would be studied. There was only one problem with this plan: it didn't work. People dosed with LSD were unlikely to divulge any secrets and more likely to end up freaking out. That didn't stop the CIA from continuing their research, however, and before long, they would find themselves delving into subprojects that aimed to push the boundaries of what they could do with LSD. One of the most insane of these subprojects was known as Sub-68, and it all started with a man named Dr. Ewen Cameron. Cameron was a Scottish psychiatrist who headed up the CIA's Canadian division. He was already something of a controversial figure, as he believed that mental illness was a result of repressed memories, and his preferred method of treating it was to use electroshock therapy to wipe his patients' memories completely blank. Then he would basically reprogram them to act normal. Now, if that sounds terrifying, wait until you hear what he came up with for Subproject 68. Cameron believed that he could take people's memories and not just erase them, but reverse them. His idea was to put patients through a process that he called depatterning, which involved giving them massive doses of LSD and putting them into a drug-induced coma. Then he would bombard them with sensory stimuli, including lights, sounds, and even smells. Now, if you've ever taken LSD, you know that the experience can be overwhelming. It's supposed to be a journey through your own psyche, a sort of adventure through your own mind. But when you're bombarded with sensory stimuli, it's a completely different story. That's why Cameron's experiments were so terrifying. They weren't just about wiping people's memories, they were about breaking them. You see, Cameron believed that by bombarding patients with sensory stimuli while they were in a coma, he could break down their minds and then rebuild them from scratch. His theory was that this would eliminate their memories and leave them as blank slates. He would then use a technique known as flooding to introduce new memories and behaviors. Basically, he wanted to see if he could turn people into zombies, complete with a hypnotic state that allowed him to control their every move. Now, you might be wondering why he would want to do this in the first place. Well, it all boils down to the Cold War. The CIA was desperate to find a way to control people's minds, and they thought that by developing a technique to erase memories and control behavior, they would have the ultimate weapon. They could use it to create sleeper agents who would unremember anything about their lives before being activated, or they could use it to brainwash enemy soldiers and turn them against each other. Luckily, Cameron's experiments never went beyond testing on prisoners and mental patients. Still, that doesn't mean that those experiments were any less horrific. One patient who was subjected to Cameron's experiments was a young woman named Christine. She was suffering from schizophrenia and was already in a fragile state of mind when she was given massive doses of LSD and put into a coma. When she awoke, she had no memory of who she was or where she came from. She didn't even recognize her own family. Cameron believed that this was a success, but in reality, he had just broken a woman's mind. Despite the horrific consequences of his experiments, Cameron was celebrated as a hero within the CIA. He was awarded the Distinguished Intelligence Medal for his work on 68 and was invited to speak at conferences all over the world. Luckily, his career would come to an end in 1964 when he was implicated in a scandal involving the theft of government funds. But his wasn't the only experiment that the CIA conducted. In fact, they were conducting experiments across the country, testing the limits of what they could do with drugs and mind control. And many of these experiments were even more disturbing than Cameron's. One of these experiments took place at Montreal's Allen Memorial Institute, and it was known as the sleep room. The sleep room was an isolation tank that was filled with a sedative solution. Patients would be submerged up to their necks in the tank and given massive doses of bup. The goal was to keep them in a state of forced coma for as long as possible. Dr. Seymour Ketty, who headed up the research, believed that by studying the effects of sleep deprivation, he could unlock the secrets of mental illness. He thought that people who suffered from mental illness were simply missing something in their brains, some kind of chemical that regulated their sleep-wake cycle, and by depriving them of sleep, he hoped to discover what that chemical was. Now, you might be wondering why he would do this in the first place. Well, the answer is simple. The CIA was willing to fund just about anything at this point. They were desperate to find a way to control people's minds, and they thought that by understanding the chemistry of sleep, they might just be able to do it. But as you might imagine, the results of the sleep room experiments were horrifying. The patients who were subjected to the tank often emerged from their comas, confused and disoriented. Many of them never fully recovered and spent the rest of their lives in mental institutions. Despite this, Cady continued his experiments until 1964 when he was forced to shut down the sleep room due to budget cuts. Now, even though the sleep room experiments were eventually shut down, they left a lasting impact on the field of sleep research. To this day, scientists are still trying to understand the effects of sleep deprivation and the role that sleep plays in our overall health. But none of them are doing it in quite the same way as Dr. Cady. It wasn't just mental patients who were subjected to these horrific experiments. The CIA tested drugs and mind control techniques on anyone who they could get their hands on, including prisoners, prostitutes, and unsuspecting civilians. One of the most infamous cases involved a prostitute named Joanne. She was given a combination of LSD and a drug that causes amnesia, and then interviewed by CIA agents while she was under the influence. The agents believed that scopolamine would cause Joanne to forget the interview, but they were wrong. Not only did she remember everything that she had said, but she also remembered everything that the agents had told her to say. The CIA was so shocked by this that they immediately classified the interview and tried to cover it up. So, there you have it. Those are just some of the most insane experiments that the CIA conducted as part of Project MKUltra. These experiments were truly some of the darkest chapters in the history of mind control.